We good?
I will see in just a second here. Yep, we are good. We are live. What is up, AV family? Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Yeah, I'm getting another echo here somewhere.
You're
There we
about
go.
to get another echo.
Yeah, right? E EW. Is this thing on? Is this thing working? I'm getting into I'm like getting into my mid 40s here, starting to turn into my dad. No, my dad is quite technologically sound.
You mean
Good
you
to
mean
be
turn into
here.
me?
And
Speaking of your dad, I will get out and play golf with him someday. I was taking a shower, listening to the daily interview with Tucker Carlson about that guy. He's great. The Marlboro smoking pro.
oh yeah,
Anyway, take it away, Mike.
will do. Uh, so good to be here. Hope everybody had a beautiful winter solstice. Merry Christmas. Bear is down south with family, coming to you live and direct from the great beach of Rincon, Ventura, California, and quite envious of the waves down there. Wow, that was
Yeah, it's a huge swell right now. I was going to do it out on the back deck, but the waves are so big that it's like crazy noise. And also, we got a professional surf photographer out there on the deck because all the pros are in town for the big swell. And my kids, they aren't out yet. They're waiting for this tide to go out a little bit. Then they're going to be out there surfing. But it's been fun to watch all day. And every day that we've been here, it's been pumping.
Yeah, El Nino is not the best name for El Nino. Like kid, it should be like I was saying, it should be El Monstro de Huevos Grande because I'm telling you, man, it's bringing the big swell. Of course, there'll be 1 million Instagram videos about the swell this month. So uh, quite funny the surf scene these days. Well, hey Bear, it's such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm stoked to be going back into our wheelhouse today. We're going to be diving into deep into back into terrain and the nature of dis-ease. Of course, we'll be using our best hobo code today because we are streaming on DoucheTube, as you affectionately call it. So I think what we're going to do, everybody, is we're going to, while we are live streaming on that platform, we're going to take it down after so you can watch the replay on Unite. We're streaming right now on unite.live on Rumble and Odyssey. And then I'll also upload it to our HowTube, and that will be available on our new platform and on our just on our website on alfavedic.com/alfacast. Just don't want to get another strike. We want to keep our YouTube channel up because a lot of you go there, and it's also how a lot of people just discover us daily. Okay, well, this is a fitting end, I believe, of the year, and also fitting. Well, not only is it sort of how we got our start, Bear, and how people discovered us by talking about this topic, but also I think a lot of people in the chat and people listening will relate to this. In the holiday season, we go hang out with family. We're around the table, and due to the nature of the winter time, somebody may have the sniffles, somebody may not be feeling well, and we get the old narrative, the old story. Well, I can't come to dinner because I don't want to get everybody sick, or I caught this, or I'm giving this, or you guys flew here and you gave me this. And it's this whole transferative idea of contagion and living under the pallor of the fear of contagion. That is a paradigm shift that so many people are challenged with, and we get it. It's not, I mean, we are fully ingrained with this concept from the moment we are born in this realm. So, Bear, you came up with the idea of doing this presentation to once again, I think, deliver in a way this information that we can properly disseminate to hopefully to friends and family members, and also just for our community ourselves to really come to a better understanding, right, of the nature of disease and dispelling the medical mythology around viruses and around contagion and all that.
Exactly. You know, a couple people very close to me when we first arrived down here, who are both very adamant against the roll up your sleever, and wouldn't dream of doing that in a million years or to any of their loved ones. On the other hand, one of them still believes in the old theory of microscopic terrorist, which we will use for this episode. Well, let's just call it MT for microscopic terrorist instead of the V word. And rather than get into it, and it wasn't a contentious sort of discussion, there's just like a genuine, well, how do you explain this stuff that we all believe that MTs are responsible for? And at the same time, how else could these things actually be occurring? And then another individual, you know, said, well, how about, you know, this person doesn't believe in the MT theory. On the other hand, had some very valid questions. And I started to ask or answer the question, which is, well, how does such and such happen? And then I just stopped and said, you know, we have about 5 minutes, you know, at the time when he was asking. I said, there's no way I can answer that. It's such a multifaceted answer. And it really, you know, requires that people dive in and know a lot of moving parts and understand how they work. So I said, hey, why not just go ahead and make a presentation? I just did it on the fly. I did it yesterday while I was out there watching
You know
the
what,
surf.
Bear?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking right now. I didn't hit record yet. We're so casual because we don't have a guest, right? Should I hit? I'm gonna hit record and do the official podcast. Do you mind?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
for
I
it.
apologize. That's an amateur move on my behalf. Okay, here we go. Here we go. For all of those on the stream, you guys get the fun pre-chat talk. And boom, we're back for another episode of Alfacast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with the good doc, the terrain maestro, Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom always reigns supreme here on the Smith River. We're enjoying the holidays. Bear is actually down south at the great beach of Rincon, the most famous break in California, with family. And I'm up here on the Smith River holding down the fort. It's been a wonderful winter solstice for us and the Alfa Vedic family. Thank you, all of you guys, for an amazing 2023. We can't say enough so much gratitude for the AV family and all the listeners out there and everyone who supported us this year. Without you guys, we would not be here. So thank you so much. And man, are we stoked for 2024. Today, we are going to dive deep into essentially the topic that brought us here to begin with, the nature of disease and the end of medical mythology. Before we hit record, we were on the live stream already explaining all this. So Bear's going to have to repeat himself. Sorry about that, Bear, but I had forgot to hit record for the podcast. But essentially, we thought this would be a very important topic to bring back to the table. No pun intended, because being the holidays and being with family, this topic seems to come up being wintertime and a family member having the sniffles, or, you know, somebody can't show up to Christmas dinner because they have a cough and they're worried about getting everyone sick. This notion of contagion, living under the pallor of fear of the microscopic little terrorists, as Bear was just talking about, the MTs, we're going to call them. Well, we're here to dispel all of that with real science and real facts and everything that Bear has come to know over his 40 plus years as a bioterrain physician. So Bear, if you don't mind repeating yourself, what you were just explaining, why you thought that this would be an important topic to end the year with, that would be awesome for our audience here.
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. I had a couple individuals close to me that we had a discussion about, let's just say, the next rollout that seems inevitable, and they're both not at all in favor of MT, roll up your sleevers. So there was a question that was posed, though, which was, well, I still don't quite get how certain conditions aren't related to an MT. How does that work? And as I was trying to answer the question very quickly, I came to the conclusion there's no way I can do this justice. And so I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make a little presentation. We're going to do it on the next podcast. Watch that, and that'll answer your question. So this is how we got to this, because originally you and I were going to just sort of do a year-end recap and talk about some other subject matter, which we'll still do. I think this is more appropriate, though. And you and I have both been involved with just not only with each other, but with other interviewers out there where we both appeared, where we talk about this subject. You were involved with a brilliant end of the COVID presentation there that really reached a lot of people, and I think was brilliant, had wonderful people on. But I still didn't see a real concise summary of what the heck does make you sick if it isn't these MTs. And that's what I put together yesterday. And I did a little, got it down on a PowerPoint. We can just use that to keep us in dialogue, and we'll kind of go through it and then just open it up to a general discussion. And we'll be as careful as possible so that the book burners don't take us down immediately in mid-episode. But as you already said, we're going to take this down after the live stream, put it on other platforms. Otherwise, we'll surely get a strike, no matter how careful we are. And isn't it something that there are douchebags out there that really think it's a good idea to control what you think and say, especially at the expense of the health of yourself and your family? They are on the wrong side of history. Shame on them, and they will all be doing the walk of shame very soon. In fact, some of them are already getting pretty sheepish.
Yes, indeed. One, I will say, thing with the end of COVID, thank you, Bear. That was a monumental task, and we're actually very excited. We'll be featuring a lot of that in the new Alfa Vedic platform, which is phenomenal. Another reason to join it. Also, we are playing around with the idea of launching terrain, a whole new terrain television concept in 2024 to continue the dialogue. And then lastly, in all fairness, to one of the ladies in the chat right here, Don Lester and David Parker, they did do a 2-part series on the end of terrain called What Really Makes Us Ill. Of course, quite well known for that book, and we've had them on our podcast, I think, 3 times. So yes, they've done amazing work explaining a lot of these concepts, and I'm very excited to see, Bear, how you sort of bring it all together from your bioterrain perspective here.
Yeah, and my remarks were not at all to suggest that there aren't good people like Dawn out there who did fantastic work and really did a scholarly work as far as explaining what really does make you sick. I'm going to correlate 6 different areas that are responsible for symptoms that we confuse with disease. And these are 6 different areas that I had to pay attention to, in particular, in all of the patients that I used to see in our clinic. So we'll just take each of those one by one. Some of it will be repetitive to things we've already said and people like Dawn. But I think this is going to be a little bit of a unique perspective, the way we packaged it up this time.
Phenomenal. Excited for this. And yeah, the hope is here, we deliver this in a way where you can share with friends and family. And you know what I'll do, Bear, is we could even distill this down to some shorter clips and stuff. And, this could even be broken down into a workshop that we put on the new platform where people can go through each aspect. And because this is important stuff to really get across to the world. It's why we did the end of COVID. That's why Alfa Vedic really exists. is to get over this old paradigm so we can move forward, because we know what they're trying to roll out. I just saw a news article about now it's called Disease X, that the Gates Foundation is prepping the new delivery method of under the tongue sort of a little wafer for a new I don't want to use it. I'm trying to use code words here. It's not even a roll up your sleever. It's an under your tonguer now. And they're calling it Disease X. So what's hilarious is they don't even know what the disease is, and they're already supposedly creating the solution for it, right? And we know this is just going to keep happening over and over and over again till people wake up to the fact that disease is not caused by these little terrorists. So, okay, enough of that.
Yeah, and what could possibly go wrong if this whole program is rolled out by a pederast eugenicist? I mean, I would trust that, wouldn't you?
Oh, no doubt. And the fact that the same psychopaths are now trying to put it in the food itself,
and spraying it in the air, aerosoling it.
Yep. Yeah, it's madness. I'm wearing a funny shirt today from Mike Cardamone. Viruses don't cause diarrhea. Denny's does.
I love that.
From his Don't Slap Snooze brand. And I will say what's scary is you extrapolate that out. They don't cause diarrhea. Denny's, yeah, you can choose to go to Denny's or not. You can't choose to go outside or not. I mean, you can stay inside if you want, but obviously that's not going to lend to a healthy lifestyle. So that's where we're at, right? It's like they're trying to dominate nature itself through their psychopathic means and spraying it in the air and doing all that. So enough's enough. The solution is the individual waking up. So the more individuals we can wake up to the truth around what really makes you ill, take from Don's book title, then we have the ability to say no as a large group of humanity and stop the insanity. So that's what we're all about.
And the Denny's analogy is actually perfect, and it will fit in when we talk about how the body rids itself of things that it doesn't need and gives us symptoms in the process, and also explains why symptoms occur. We'll get to that one. That's number 3 on our list of 6 areas that cause disease. If those 6 areas are not kept in perfect balance, and understanding even when we get symptoms, they are healing mechanisms and not at all symptoms of an illness or a disease. So keep in mind that I just did this on the fly yesterday and got some stuff down on a PowerPoint. That'll keep my thoughts organized, because we could ramble in any one of these topics to a complete episode. And I'm also glad you mentioned that we'll be expanding this on our website, because each of these 6 areas will be in singularity the subject matter of entire podcasts, and also instructional videos on our membership site that bring in all of the do-it-yourself kind of techniques, as well as things that physicians should be doing, and teaching them how to do these things as well. So we're going to have a lot of video content on all this. So consider this a nice overview so we can start the year off with our heads on straight.
Okay, I love it. Can I just say one thing? I'm into
just this one time, Michael.
Doing these goal cards now. Tara Pilling got me into this, who was our guest last year, about setting your goals for the year. And on my goal card, it was essentially, I will not be getting sick. I will stay completely healthy all year. And I will say this is one of the first years that I can remember that I didn't even get a sniffle. Didn't get any sort of symptoms of detoxing, of winter composting, as we'll talk about it today. So I think, kind of going back to our guest a few weeks ago, Mr. Grace, about really understanding our power of our consciousness over our body, which I'm sure we'll touch on today, is so important. And setting that goal that, it's like, I'm not even going to go through the symptoms this year. because I'm going to, one, take care of myself in a way which we'll discuss, but also that I'm not going to victimize myself through even having to go through those physical symptoms. So it worked.
Or
It
how
worked
about,
in, you know,
how about how about this though? If you have symptoms, you bless them because it means your body is fit enough to have a reaction. And I've said often that when I was in my clinical work, people that would come in with a big diagnosis and very often say, how did this happen to me? I don't even catch colds. And my remark was, well, that's why this happened to you, because if you did regular composting, which we call colds and flus and other things, then your body wouldn't get so far down the road to where it had to make cellular and DNA changes that scare the bejesus out of everybody. But those, even at that stage, are healing strategies that the body has. And if you understand what the body is doing, even at those advanced stages, you can work with them and very often have a very favorable outcome. So, Michael, go ahead and maybe we'll jump into the first slide there. And
okay.
Do you want to control it on your end?
Whatever is easiest, that's fine. I don't mind. Here, let me go to share screen. I'm going to throw it over on this screen because I'm a nerdy techie that has 3 monitors. Go. Can you see that, Bear?
I can see it.
Okay.
Let's see, I'm looking at myself talking here. I'm not seeing the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
I'm seeing actually your screen is showing the YouTube play.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay, let me just do this real quick. Sorry, y'all. Desktop 3 is what I want. Sorry, guys. How's that? How's that?
That looks good.
Okay.
Do you think that's big enough for everybody there?
I will see shortly here. Indeed, I think we're good. I'm gonna maximize it. There we
Yeah,
go.
awesome. Yeah, that looks better. All right, and we're going to go through a lot of pages, and we're going to breeze through them pretty quick and use these pages for the purposes of discussion. Because again, if I, again, just off the top of my head yesterday, I just jotted down some things that that I think important. But if we talked about every one of them, we would have at least a 4-hour podcast here. So we'll, for the sake of brevity, just highlight things. So bioterrain, a unified field. And what that means is bioterrain is not just bugs and cells and things that we consider physiology or physicality. The bioterrain is actually a unified force field that incorporates everything from the origin of all of the, let's just say, those forces that create matter and bodies and everything, you know, within our realm in the first place, all the way down to us as little stick figures on the ground. So you have to understand that whole continuum in order to understand how disease, as we think of it, occurs. And you have to address all of those elements in between. And we call it the mechanics of homeostasis. Homeostasis, as we understand, is just the body keeping itself right, adjusted internally and also in sync with the external environment. And it's a real mechanical process. And let's go to the next slide there, Michael. Yeah. Now, I promise we're not going to get into the weeds, you know, and alchemical concepts and all that kind of stuff. We do that quite a bit, and it's important because what we're trying to do is illustrate that a long time ago, people actually understood all this. So when you go into old texts and practices and then jump in with both feet and do certain things yourself, you realize they actually knew what they were talking about. And for someone like myself that actually practiced clinical medicine for a long time, you find that when you do certain things, it works. And if you do other things, things don't work. So in this particular chart here, we have a whole tab up above where we have attributes, ether element, all the way down to what we call metamorphosis. And we'll go real quick and then we'll get really grounded into the subject matter today. But if the average physician or scientist, as we think of it, understood this chart and all these elements and how they play together, we would be living in a totally different world. So there are certain elements that create what the old alchemists and people in past cultures understood, that create a whole mechanism that precipitates matter from electrical forces that start from idea. And then if you go into more of a Western concept of the ether, where it has fire, air, water, earth, then we are talking about molecular elements that correlate with what they were talking about in the first place. Then if you move over to the right, electrical, well, those same four etheric levels can be understood as an electrical apparatus that any electrical engineer these days would understand, but it's exactly the way our bodies occur in the first place. And then our etheric body is our own personal ethers that incorporates our consciousness and a projection of our body through the four ethers. And this is just a microcosm of the larger etheric mechanism. And then when you look at those etheric levels, you would also understand how those in turn create the essence that alchemists talked about, which is mercury, salt, sulfur. And then if you move over to the last one, it says metamorphosis. If you understand what the alchemists were talking about with sulfur, mercury, salt, you would understand how those three elements are at play in the three divisions of our body, which is the torso, the extremities, and the cranium. We could talk a lot more about each one of them, but that metamorphosis concept comes from Rudolf Steiner, but again, validated by other people. So if I'm seeing somebody and I see an affliction affecting one part of their body, I can really understand it from an alchemical perspective, as far as if they're sulfur, which is the soul individualization, the mercury, which is the universal prana or life force, and the salt, which is the precipitation of that into a physical medium, then you would understand just by looking at a body and symptoms exactly where the imbalances are on a very deep level. And let's go to the next slide there and get into it. So we have 6 different areas, and disease, is it a biological reset or is it an affliction? That is, of course, the big debate that is raging out there. And I just put a little quote, the terrain is everything. We've all heard that before. I don't even like talking in terms of terrain medicine. When I'm farming, we don't call it terrain farming. Obviously, it's terrain. But, isn't it interesting that we have to have all these terminologies just to distinguish from the bullshit? Like when we go into a store to buy food, and if the food is a little healthier than your average supermarket, we call it a health food store. No, it's just a food store. So I'd really like to stop all this terminology that we have to speak about, like alternative health. No, we're not alternative. We're real health. And bioterrain medicine is just recognizing the obvious truth that people have known for centuries. So now, if we go through these 6 areas, these are all the areas that you need to pay attention to if symptoms arise. And then you will understand not only why they are happening, but you'll understand what to do about it. The first thing is we can have deficiencies. Deficiencies in inorganic, the elemental cell salts, for instance, and organic matter, which is what we get in our food, and even right directly through the atmosphere. Then we move down, we have biome imbalances, which has to do with our indigenous microbial populations and their interaction and resonance with external soil-based organisms, mycelium, and so forth. Toxicosis is the next level. If the body is inundated, like we're talking about with Denny's, we'll probably get sued by Denny's now, and the body needs to purge after having a meal there. Well, that's because the body is perceiving some level of toxicosis and said, get this the hell out of my body. The next level is line of resistance. That is understanding that we are electrical beings, and molecules, as we think of them, really are manifestations of a waveform and an appearance, and really nothing more than a waveform, because there's nothing in existence that isn't a waveform. So you really have to understand things on that level if you want to understand why, for instance, our consciousness, things we've put in motion in past times, comes back for a chance to rebalance, and it might talk to us in the meantime if we don't get our act together. So we look at things electrically and not molecularly or strictly from a biochemical level, because that's really not where things happen. We have karmic, which we have collective miasm. We'll talk about that. Karmic, of course, is just energy put in motion at any particular time in our past, past embodiment, earlier times in our life. And it's not that we have to, have original sin or we're here doing our karma. No, it's just an opportunity to really observe our experience and figure out why it is that we don't like certain things and then change it. And that's what this talk is all about, is understanding these 6 areas that make us tick. The last one, we talk about emotion and emotional issues really comprise, along with karmic and these other things, about 90% of all of our afflictions. So if it seems kind of a little too touchy-feely that we talk about emotions when it comes to our health, well, emotions are what allow things to pop in the matrix in the first place, because if there wasn't any emotional behind an idea or a thought or an intention, it would remain a thought bubble and not have the velocity or the strength to pop into the matrix. And we can go to slide 4.
Yeah, emotion is the desire, right? That pushes it all through.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so form and function. How does form and function precipitate? Our bodies are, of course, a composite of cells that are in turn a product of things on other levels. Now, all of the patterns, the blueprints, they all exist in more of those etheric levels. We've had prior talks where we speak on the original source of these programs, we'll say, which is right above our heads in the sky clock all the time. We don't need to get into that, but for right now, we're talking about the first level of why the body can possibly get sick, and that has to do with deficiencies. And the 12 cell salts are what should be circulating in our bloodstream all the time, because the cells then take those cell salts, and the cell salts are receiving informational fields, or what we can loosely call resonance. And from that resonance, they are informational fields that are specific to create a certain geometry, which will then not only create form, but the form will also dictate how things work. And how things work in the body we call physiology. So the cell salts, I'll read it here, provide the informational fields required for the distribution and regulation of organic matter, fluids, and oxygen for cellular renewal, biotoxin removal, and a balanced pH. If any of those are deficient, and unfortunately they are with a lot of people these days, because these are not as plentiful in even organic food and and in the soil that even the best of farmers use these days for farming, then those deficiencies play into our bodies. And historically, there have been instances where certain pockets of people, or cultures would perhaps be deficient because of whatever was unique to their locale or geography. And these deficiencies then would create more of a panoramic kind of reaction as far as symptoms in bodies. And then that's one reason why, we believe in things like pandemics and everything, when in fact it's just everybody's eating the same deficient food or exposed to certain things that are using up those elements inordinately so that we are left with a deficiency. And if there's a deficiency, then things happen. It has consequences. Now, I gave 3 examples. I showed this on a past presentation we did, and I think we gave example 1 as far as how malaria, as we think of it, is actually caused, the symptoms, not from a MT, but from a deficiency of a couple things. But let's go down to example 3, since we covered that in the past time, and then we can move on. And just as to illustrate how possibly a deficiency could cause one particular thing, we could explain how it causes everything. If any one of these 12 cell salts is deficient, we could go down the complete taxonomy of disease and explain every single one of them according to a deficiency. Here's an example. A brain embolus. Okay, that of course is a clot that affects the brain, cuts off oxygenation to the brain. Then, not so good things happen with strokes and that sort of thing. And in the process, that could be attributed or is attributed to if there is a deficiency of a certain cell salt called kali-muriaticum. That kali-muriaticum is responsible for the production and distribution of fibrin. And then that fibrin has to do everything with blood viscosity and the proper regulation of blood viscosity so that you don't get blood clotting and all the things that would ensue with that. Now, do we know anybody that's having problems with blood clotting these days? Yeah, it seems to be like there's a real epidemic, if you want to talk about epidemics, and we don't even have to get into why that is. It's again, in this situation, has to do with something besides just a kali-muriaticum deficiency. However, if you are deficient, which most people would be these days, especially people that are doing the roll up your sleever, that kali-muriaticum is going to create work with your blood in order to reduce the likelihood of those other elements in the roll up your sleever to create that clotting in the first place. Now, there's a lot of other things that we could do to help prevent people that have unfortunately prevent those kinds of issues and people that unfortunately went down that road. But for right now, this is just one particular example. Let's go example 2 real quick for the heck of it. Let's just say we have something where a diagnosis called pneumonia. It's just inflammation of the lungs and infiltrations of certain exudates or debris and things that accumulate in the lung and give us all the symptoms that a medical doctor would say, oh, you have pneumonia. Now, if the body is deficient of kalium sulfuricum, which is responsible for a lot of things, but most notably for maintaining skin pores so that they can vent all of the unwanted biotoxins and things. And with that deficiency, those skin pores are inappropriately closed, then all of the elements that would normally be eliminated through that channel then start to accumulate in certain tissues of the body, fibrins and all sorts of things. And if it were to occur in a different organ, then a doctor would say, oh, you have a different diagnostic label. If it happens in the lungs, then you have pneumonia. So it's really silly because all of these things attribute to every single affliction, but even though it's a common cause, it could be remedied very quickly and easily. Then we say, oh, it's this disease versus that disease, just because things are accumulating in a different address because of the same kalium sulfuricum deficiency. So we're going very superficial because we're trying to get through a lot of things. But what I'm trying to do is to get some ideas across, some concepts, so that we can start to appreciate how in this one first instance out of the 6 we're going to review, great consequences consequences occur with deficiencies, and some would argue, myself included, that deficiency is the number one cause of symptoms or what we think of as disease. Any comments, Mike?
Well, I was just going to say, of course, the nomenclature behind the symptomology groups all of these causes into the single effect, right, into the symptom. And that's a huge problem. Once again, modern science, not understanding causes, just looking at effects. So that creates a lot of the confusion, because you think of pneumonia, you think of the classic example of the child outside without the proper scarf, jumping into the cold water and then getting pneumonia, and seeing that as the problem that, you know, your body got that bacterial infection from your body being broken down by the cold, and all of that. So, oh, thank you. My mailman dad just showed up. Thank you. But
tell him hi.
Yeah, instead of understanding that that there's a lot of different causes for the body's effects.
Exactly. So pretty easy to understand when you look at natural design and understand how things work. Then you don't have to have MT theories and all of these different names for the same thing. And of course, when deficiencies occur and you have inadequate regulation of certain material in your body because cells don't have the informational fields to put it where it's necessary and to eliminate it where it's unnecessary, then you have microbiology comes into play. We're going to see that, I think, next year. And so if these little organisms that are our friends that live inside of us, they'll progress into life cycle forms that will become scavengers to help us clean up all the stuff that the body can't get rid of. And then, of course, at the same time, they'll do a culture and find a MT at the scene of the crime and say, oh, there's the cause. I mean, it's the most asinine thing in the world. And I have very harsh thoughts about doctors that are still that dumb, because that's okay. That's their prerogative. But in the process, they're hurting people and they're promulgating fear, which in and of itself is going to cause disease, which we'll see in some later slides here. You can go ahead, Mike.
Can I ask just one more question then? These deficiencies, which are obviously apparent in the modern times, I'm assuming that, because we come from the perspective, from the foundation that this human body is a technological system that is divinely oriented and quite perfect in its design. And so obviously, originally, we weren't suffering from said deficiencies. This is sort of part of probably our karmic repercussions of stripping our soils, of course, from all the industrial farming, but also I'm wondering if maybe the Great Flood had something to do with this, going back to Atlantis, stripping out these minerals. I mean, what's your theory on, and did we have a time where these minerals were all there for our food and that we didn't have these deficiencies? And was it even not that long ago? Maybe it was the mud flood.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I don't know exactly, but I would not think deficiencies occurring now are for the reason of something that occurred a long time ago, because these mineral elements are biotic, just like water. The source of water isn't just what we get out of the sky. We have primal water that's made in the carbon core of our earth, or we'll say deeper levels of the plane, however you want to think about it. And the same with oil. Of course, we're not burning fossil fuels and thinking that we're pumping old dead dinosaurs out of the earth. Oil is biotic. It is made inside the earth. And when you understand Walter Russell's periodic table, you see how not only are all of these things produced, these elements in the earth, but they also transit through a whole series of octaves and tonal fields in each octave to become a different element than it just was a step before, through the process of transmutation. And that's a very key thing that we have to understand. The last thing I'll say on this form and function slide is over to the right. I just have a list of, it says calcium salts, potassium salts, sodium, and so forth. And we won't go through each one of them here, but people can review later and see just a real cursory idea of what, for instance, calcarea florica is for the informational fields, so the cells can make the elastic connective tissue matrix. Next one down, hard bony tissues. Calc sulf is related to cleaning out the matrix itself, not just laying tissue. So you'll see in each of these, some are responsible for regeneration, some are responsible for distribution, some are responsible for just making sure that things don't accumulate where they're going to cause problems. And each of these, of course, and we talked about this before, can be correlated with a different source of resonance in the sky clock. And that's another whole story. But if you understand that level of reality, it would explain how these 12 elements that act as capacitors, which means they receive the informational fields and hold them to be used by the cells of our body in all levels of biology, physiology, and just creation, period. We can then appreciate more that continuum that we're alluding to on slide 1 there.
Amazing. Oh yeah, this will be a whole other Alfacast in the future.
Yeah. And we've touched on some of them, but we haven't really gone deep.
Yeah. Okay, next slide.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about deficiencies of elements, and now we're going to talk about another very important part of the train, which is our little living ecobionts. And let me just read a little bit here. German biologist Gunther Enderlein discovered protein colloids. Colloid is a grouping, so a group of protein that comprised the pre-stages of bacteria. Initially, he was looking at them as just pre-stages of bacteria. He considered these primitive protein groups, or what he termed chondrichtins, as the beginning of life on the evolutionary ladder. And much can be said about that. I myself believe that they are the smallest units of life or responsible for life in our physical universe. And number 2 there, a symbiotic fusion of the smallest living forms in living cells. So what do? They actually use the machinery of living cells, because remember, these are just groups of protein. They aren't really organized in an advanced fashion like a living cell, which has its own boundaries, its lines of demarcation with internal organ systems and all the feedback loops that keep it in touch with every other cell in the body, and so that they can all work as a unit. So these cells these will be incorporated into living cells. And then when they are needed in a certain life cycle form, because these little protids or protein forms, there are a lot of names for them. I studied with Gaston Naissance. He called them somatids. Each one of them will go through 16 mutational stages. Each one of these stages is going to have a particular useful function, and will go to that particular life cycle stage when the body needs the function at that level. For instance, let's just say we get a little coral cut, in our foot when we're surfing, and you get some coral stuck in there. Well, certain organisms are going to migrate to the scene. They're going to pleomorphically change into a bacterial stage in order to provide scavenger function. And then these scavengers will clean up the area. And if your body is otherwise healthy and has all the other resources it needs, then it will just go away. If it sticks around and gets a little unsightly and uncomfortable, and we go to the doctor and they culture it and say, oh, you have a staph infection. Well, that is just a progression of a life cycle that is there trying to help you clean up the area. And it was from a microorganism that is already indigenous in your body. So where are we here? So they cycle through 16 mutational stages to fulfill numerous physiological functions. Endobionts, as Enderlein later called them, developed into autonomic. In other words, they just trigger automatically through these phases when the body tells them to do so. And then this happens inside of blood cells. So when these actors are needed to go systemic in order to do their job, they're extruded from the cells as a result of cellular destruction. And what's that mean? Well, these guys are, remember, one of the functions that they provide, which is important, is they are scavengers. So when things accumulate relative to too much biotoxin accumulation or a deficiency of some type, then these guys help keep the terrain clean, just like putting bottom feeders in your aquarium. You need those guys in any ecosystem. So let's talk about, well, actually, one more comment. If you take a lot of bodies these days that are in a very sorry state where the bioterrain is not only toxic, but it's in a state of decline, there are going to be a lot of diseased and broken down cells that need to be cleaned up. And if we don't take measures to clean them up ourselves, then you're going to have an inundation of these microorganisms that are helpers, but now they're inappropriately in a scavenger phase all the time. And that is also going to be what we call decomposition, because now they're not just getting rid of some stuff that they can do their job and go away. They're there full time because the environment is so downstream, and we're literally decomposing while we're still in the body, if that's the case. And of course, that is going to lead to further issues, symptoms, and also really reduce the longevity that we might otherwise enjoy. So let's go to
Bear, not to
Go
mention
ahead.
then the therapeutics like antibiotics, anti-life, that get administered when one goes to an MD or an allopath, which then just further creates problems because now you've disrupted the cleaning process and further damaged the terrain, and now have just essentially extended the problem out and potentially cause such damage that you will get now chronic issues and issues that could lead to life-threatening issues.
Yeah, and there were things, of course, in the more recent past that were suppressed, things like methylene blue, that were, if you just want a very easy do-it-yourself kind of thing that's going to really benefit your body in a lot of ways. Well, it was also the perfect, I don't want to call it an antibiotic, but it would selectively, while that's also helping your body manufacture more energy, ATP, it would also clean up a lot of the microorganism imbalances because we haven't taken care of the terrain. And that one substance alone would have negated the need or even the concept that something like antibiotics were desirable. And of course, that's why methylene blue, I'm just using that as an example, it's only one, has been suppressed because it would undermine an entire segment of the industry that makes billions and billions every day off of these things. And of course, if they didn't have something like that, and then we went to more the natural remedies, then they're actually eliminating their audience or their customers, will say. So we understand in this audience that pharmaceuticals have nothing to do with getting well. It's about creating sickness because it's a good business model. So in a microbial milieu, we have pleomorphism, which we've talked about, life cycle phases in response to bioterrain requirements. And each of these organisms in each of the cycles is specific to different functions and tissues in the body. And there's also a correlation with tissue types and how tissues evolve embryologically when we are forming a new body. And depending on the level of the central nervous system or the brain that pairs up relative to common germ cells with different organs in a body, then if there's a job to do in any of one of those three tissue types, then these microorganisms that have a special affinity to that germ type of tissue are going to be the ones that will go in. And as you see, down there, some examples of fungus, mycobacteria, and so forth. We could talk a lot about each one of these, and a lot of this embryological microorganism connection is understood within German New Medicine as well. And then to the right, the ecobionts of the human ecosystem, they're not all listed here, but these are the ones that we would use in an isopathic form more commonly in clinical medicine. And microorganism species innate to human ecology possess affinities to distinct tissues and conditions. These include, and you'll see a list of different organisms and the affinity for any particular tissue that they have. And that is like an immense topic. And people in old school bioterrain medicine that actually understood how to use these isopathics, we consider them the most important thing as far as a pharmacy necessary for medicine, but also something that gets the most immediate traumatic results. And then all of your other modalities are going to work that much better. So just like we need all of the elements, the inorganic elements we call cell salts, so that we don't have a deficiency, we also want to make sure we have all of these actors in the body in waiting. And when you take isopathics, it's going to download a good number of each of these organisms in their seed form to repopulate those that are deficient. And many of these are deficient too because they're part of our biome, which has been very much compromised these days with all of the biotoxins that are always assaulting us, and not just chemical poisons, but of course the things that are flying through the air that we call shortwave vertical waveforms, which are what Wi-Fi and that sort of thing are. And these things penetrate through our body. Our body has no resistance to this kind of waveform. And that's why one of the reasons why people are getting sick, and because of these external influences that didn't used to exist. I wanted to make a comment. You were talking about somebody catching a cold per se, and they say, well, it's because I got cold. Well, if bioterrain is deficient or compromised, then something happens that we understand in Chinese medicine, and that is your external barrier, which is the male polarity. We call the Wei Qi, something in martial arts. We take great efforts to develop and accumulate energy to make that Wei Qi stronger, because that's what's going to help you withstand a punch. It's also going to help you withstand having external cold influences actually become stressful, which then can create a reaction. And of course, the reaction isn't because we call it an MT because we're too cold. It's because an overall condition of too much cold within the bioterrain. In fact, our next slide is going to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, obviously there's a direct correlation. People have seen it and experienced it when extended your energies too much out in the cold and then you get a runny nose. That's obviously a a real effect that your body is going through, but that's an internal effect that your body has its intelligence kicking in, right? I will say you have like your traditional bacterial infections. I think this slide really covers well, you know, your E. coli, your strep throat, right? Streptococcus. You know, traditionally people have been taught that someone coughs that has strep, that somehow that little MT comes out of their mouth and goes in your mouth, and that can infect you. But we stress here that that is not how the microbiology works. And that's why you have, like my wife, who works in a hospital and is around sick people all day, doesn't get sick. Because if, you know, and of course they use the immune system, right? Mainstream medicine uses the immune system, and they will rightly admit that there is good bacteria, of course, but they still stick to the germ theory of disease, that these bacterial micro entities can leave one body and go into another body and cause illness, and as like sort of like an attacking vector, if you will. And that's simply not how it works.
And of course, it's substantiated by them culturing, you know, fluids to your body or tissue and finding these bacterial or fungal forms. They just don't understand that they're already inside of you, and they life cycled to that stage for good reason. And sometimes when they become problematic, it's because they're trying to do a job, but they can't get it done because we are doing other things to counteract the good things they're doing, or we're just compromised from the get-go, which means that the body can't just do its job and get the heck out of there and go back to its lying in wait protid form. So it's a very good idea for people these days to take these products in more of a mild form, and they come in, you know, many forms, including what I used to use, which were injectable. But you don't want to do that if you don't know how these work, because you can provoke too much of a die off and have reactions, even though it's not going to be because of their problematic in and of themselves. So if you just take very gentle forms and cycle in and out of the different solutions of each of these organisms, probably the best thing people could do in order to just slowly build up their biome. And it's going to do a heck of a lot more than just trying to take probiotics by drinking a lot of kefir or something. Not that that's not okay, but these are the real actors that live within us, and it will proliferate when we take them in isopathic form. And if somebody is in a situation where these are already in advanced forms, but they're overstaying their welcome and therefore just recycling continuously in ways we're starting to break our body down, not through any design or fault of their own, but because of the bioterrain condition, then when you take the isopathics, it is going to down regulate those recycler forms into their benign forms, which are the first three stages of the 16-phase cycle that they can all potentially go through when the needs arise.
Man, I wish I knew that as a youth when I had my chronic strep throat issues growing up, and
Yeah.
essentially torturing myself. We do, for our private members, have isopathics in our store only for private members. Also, I was going to say we do sell the cell salts as well. So we actually provide most of the products you would be required for you to maintain your terrain with this knowledge right on alfavedic.com. One thing we can get into in a little bit too, I probably the slides down the line will help explain this better, but I think a lot of people have questions, and this came up on our recent co-op meeting, executive co-op meeting, this concept of chlamydia, gonorrhea, STDs, right? Because
Right.
that historically has been, used to prove the transmission of disease from body through bodily fluids. And once again, we can explain how that works, and it doesn't relate to a specific microorganism just being transferred through the sexual act to create the symptoms.
Yeah, and while you're on the subject, everything we've talked about so far will actually leave one very vulnerable to having those kinds of symptoms, like waking up the next morning after you have a little fling with somebody from the club or something, and you say, uh-oh, I've got symptoms. Well, those can be explained through the deficiency mechanism. And just like exudates and debris can accumulate in the lungs if it's deficient in certain cell salts, well, by the same token, things can accumulate into other tissues like the urogenital tract, which means you'll start to pee all sorts of weird stuff. And it's just the clean out mechanism. The additional thing that's necessary to understand in that, there also has to be an energetic predisposition that we'll talk about in a few minutes when we get to that slide. So if this new partner is of a particular predisposition and you share that energetic trait, then the energy fields or the resonance for those patterns can be considered contagions. Another reason not just to go sleep around, because you're picking up all sorts of energy and karmic debris and all sorts of things that can not only create physical symptoms or leave you vulnerable there, but on deeper levels of your spiritual being. So it's good to get our Wei Qi, our tube of light, whatever you want to think of it, nice and strong, which is all a sequelae of a healthy body. And then you will be less vulnerable for picking anything up, including maybe hanging out with somebody that had 16 roll up your sleevers and they're shedding all over the place.
Yeah, I would say the sexual
Whether or
act
not
is,
that's a phenomenon.
well, I'll just say on, to put a tail on that, the sexual act is the most divine physical act one of the most, if not the most, the generative act, right, of creation. And when we flippantly engage in that through a very physical, materialistic means, and depending on who that is, that can lead to very disastrous physical, mental, spiritual effects that will then, of course, come out in all sorts of physical ways. And I hope to get into this more later in the year, because I think it is a core fundamental for understanding the spiritual path and in mastering your sexual qi, your sexual kung fu, if you will, and understanding how important a role for both the female soil and the man's seed, if you will, plays into not only the esoteric tradition and everything. I mean, Marty Leeds just did a fantastic Christmas special on Santa Claus and how that relates all to this aspect of the white and the red coloring going down the chimney from the essentially from your crown to your base, and the sexual hearth, if you will, and that going back up to lead to the Christ consciousness and all of those wonderful concepts from the esoteric realm. Well, doesn't need to be esoteric. These are fundamental truths that we all need to understand, and why I believe so many people do in their 20s or in their times of when they are going out to the club have so many problems in their lives when they're dealing with sexuality in that way.
Yeah, it's the most powerful energy, as you say, and it's supposed to go up. And if we're preoccupied with the sacral area, then it's always your energy is going to be going down. And a lifetime of that is going to create what you look at in old bodies, which is people just start getting shorter, bent over, and so forth, because the energy has gone downward for too long. Now, we also run the risk of erring too far into concepts that have been fed to us through religions that somehow that energy is dirty or bad. So now we get into the work of Wilhelm Reich, which I want to do at least a couple episodes on. He understood that that energy was the most powerful energy, and he wasn't coming about it from a religious or puritanical, uh, uh, you know, mindset at all. What he was saying is that this energy, because of religions and programming that make us feel dirty about that, then that is going to lead to certain repressions that will carry over in our life and everything we do. And he wasn't at all saying that, it's just a free for all and use that whenever you feel like it. And then, of course, when you get into advanced techniques, you not only are able to take that energy and direct it with your mind up that central column through the regulation centers, but then it allows more of a healthy distribution and manifestation of that energy without suppression.
Beautiful. Okay, next slide, sir.
Okay, so the 6 stages of disease, we've gone through deficiency, we've gone through the elements within the living elements within the biome, and hopefully we got a little bit of a good idea as far as how disease symptoms can happen when those 2 areas are out of balance. And now the third one is when we have an accumulation of toxins. And interestingly enough, in Ayurvedic medicine, long ago, they understood 6 progressive stages of disease marked by specific changes. And those changes would provide insights into why certain symptoms happen in a sequential fashion. And right above that, we have the Shanghan Lun, which is the original Bible of Chinese medicine. Independently, they came up with the understanding that disease happens in 6 successive stages. Now, they explained it relative to how disease goes into more superficial organs and tissues. And then as things accumulate more in the body, if we don't make things right, then deeper, more critical or vital organs will be compromised, which leads us to the final 6th stage, which is where, we have our biggest problems. And so both Ayurvedic and the Shanghan Lun describe this exactly with the exact number of progressive stages, but within the language, of course, of Ayurvedic. I didn't put the Ayurvedic Sanskrit terminology here because I have a hell of a time pronouncing that myself, even though I've seen it for years. And also the Shanghan Lun, which was more where I came from early on with my specializing in Chinese medicine. And it has to do, again, you see things like the Tai Yang and the Yang Ming and the Xiao Yang. Well, those are more the external yang organs and tissues that are the body's first line of defenses. And then when issues become more problematic, it's because they are now seeping into the yin levels. And those, I think I left one out. Okay, anyway, I'll have to fix that later. Anyway, there's 3 yin levels. And when things get down to that level, now the more vital organs are being compromised, which means your health is more in jeopardy. So another thing to understand is that when the worst problems happen, it's when the yin energy, which is our inner core, that energy that is responsible for regeneration and creation, starts to leak through the Wei Qi. And you can even measure that when it's happening. In clinical kinesiology, for instance, we had something called therapy localization. where in conjunction with muscle testing, you could therapy localized, which means touch an area of your hands which have different polarity surfaces in a certain way onto the area where the leakage is happening, and you'll get a positive test. There are also different instruments I use that would measure that in different ways, but it has to do when that outer barrier is compromised, the yin leaks to the surface, and that also means the yin organs are compromised and vital functions are in jeopardy. So if we go to the next one, we'll explain that in more Western terms. Diseases are the expression of biologically purposeful defense mechanisms against endogenous and exogenous, in other words, toxins produced inside of our body, a result of faulty metabolism or metabolism that is trying to too much because of what's on its plate. And also toxins from our external world, from you name it. Stuff we talk about all the time, stuff that's aerosoling in the atmosphere, things that get injected into our bodies in the name of medicine, electromagnetic contaminations from cell towers and the like. So German medical doctor and homeopath Hans Heinrich Reckeweg coined the 6-stage of disease schematic. And what he described was that this is the organism's effort to compensate for toxic damage it has sustained. And just like the Ayurvedics and Chinese practitioners, he came up with the 6 stages of disease. And again, remember, he's a German medical doctor, so he's coming at this from a Western mindset. And so you have phases of adaptation that correlate with body strategies to excrete, sequester. That means take things and wall them off in a specific area so they aren't systemic, creating worse problems, and also to neutralize toxins through physiological mechanisms. And you have 3 phases. Each phase has 2 phases within it. The humoral phase is where you would consider a fairly healthy body, where if it has a fine meal at Denny's, for instance, and the body doesn't like something that was in there, oh, maybe some kind of GMO kind of thing, or fake meat, or name it, some kind of additive, then it is going to trigger an excretion action. You might purge through the lower bowel. You might upchuck. You might have to speed up the pulse so that the body can go into a fever and have muscular convulsions that we experience with fevers, in order to get the fluid that is contaminated to start being excreted through the pores, which is what a sweat in the aftermath of a fever is all about. We say, oh, we broke the fever. Well, we didn't break a fever. It's just that the body, through that mechanism, was able to successfully eliminate a lot of contamination through the sweat pores. And then when that was lessening the load, then you break the fever. And then that fever is either going to not come back, or if it does come back, there's a very easy to understand reason why the body might have to have fevers repetitively, maybe for a week or something. And it all makes sense. And then also with the cell salts, you want to make sure that it has all the elements like ferrum phosphoricum, calcium muriaticum, and any number of things, depending on what the underlying issue is, to make sure the body is even more successful in eliminating through physiological mechanisms. So that's excretion. And when the body does not get triggered that way, when it gets something noxious into it, that means that it is inundated to a point where the health is not able to muster up that excretion mechanism, or maybe the amount of biotoxins are just so overwhelming that the body can't eliminate it all through normal excretion. And so then we're going to go into the inflammatory stage, which means you're going to have a different set of symptoms when excretion isn't capable of handling the whole problem. And it's just a further, more advanced strategy to neutralize toxins that it can't adequately remove. Now, when you're in this humoral phase, it means, as humoral suggests, that things are still in the fluids or the blood, and that things haven't gone to the next phase, which is the matrix phase. Now, when you get into the matrix phase, you're going to have more advanced symptoms and potentially hazardous issues. You're going to first go into deposition. So if the body has these things that it can't otherwise excrete or neutralize, then it's going to have to stick them somewhere. It might be in the liver, it might be in the skin, it might be in the lungs. And wherever that deposition happens, then you're going to have symptoms in that part of the body, which is going to require a medical genius to come along and have a diagnostic label specifically suited for that particular condition in that part of the body. Again, even though it's all from the same common mechanisms and cause. Now, after the deposition, you go into impregnation. Now, that means that the body has now had these little deposits. And these deposits, it'll create like a cyst where it'll create a wall around it. So the stuff is kind of contained in an area, just like, you might have a nuclear reactor meltdown. And so they might build a moat around it, like they did in Fukushima. So it's somewhat contained and not just going into the open ocean unabated, even though it's inevitable that things aren't going to work out well in the long run. Well, the body does the same thing in the next best effort. And if the deposits are there long enough, then those biotoxins become impregnated or literally tattooed into the tissues. Now, when those biotoxins literally become part of the connective tissue itself, you have another whole more advanced set of symptoms. We'll finish up with this third phase and then we'll open it up here. The cellular phase. Okay, now we've already had deposition, things have got tattooed into the tissues, and now that's going to require or trigger cellular damage from a cumulative toxicosis. And what we have then finally in stage 6 is a differentiation of cells. The cells will actually become aberrant and start showing cellular changes because of everything we've talked about, including DNA damage itself. And that's when you get the big diagnosis. And of course, anybody that understands the 6 stages of disease would tell you, well, let's keep things in the humoral phase. At very least, don't let it go into the cellular phase. But regardless of how a patient presents himself, then you know how to have a retrograde treatment, which then over time is going to go through all these stages in a reverse, more beneficial order. But when you get down to the cellular phase, it gets a little tricky because people have already had a seed planted in their consciousness that they better get their affairs in order. And we'll talk about more how that is the biggest cause of disease as we know it yet. And but either way, a good clinician can look at any symptom and understand which phase of the 6 phases the body is in and what tissue is being affected based on the symptoms or other kinds of clinical assessments. It could be laboratories, it could be radiographs, CAT scans, you name it. But it's going to tell me depending where it is, where we're at, what tissues involved. And in the original 6 stages of disease chart that Reckewig did, he created not only these a nice little chart that showed these phases that we're talking about, but also went into every tissue type within the body, and depending on the tissue type and how you can just cross-reference in his original chart, you can see how, for instance, if a nervous system tissue is in the humoral phase, what kinds of maladies you would expect, or if it goes into the matrix phases or into the cellular phases. And for instance, if you have a neurotoxin and you're in the matrix phase, then you're going to get things like MS, migraine headaches, all sorts of stuff. And of course, those are clues to a clued-in physician what exactly is going on and how to reverse the whole thing that happened in the first place. Any comments, Mike?
I love that. We talked about this with the Bigglesons during the end of COVID. And I think the big takeaway here is the word drainage, right?
Right. Drainage is going to be absolutely necessary. You're also going to have to take care of the biome. And with live cell microscopy, I would use that as one of the main assessment tools in order to triangulate that with labs correlated with physical exam to know exactly what's going on, how to prioritize treatment, and understand if you're doing drainage protocols, which for folks that haven't heard that term, it means things that will help certain tissues clean themselves out. I prefer spagyric remedies or gamma therapies, which are plant stem cell concentrates. Homeopathy has its place. I found that even though I was trained in classical homeopathy in naturopathic college, I found that relative to today's illnesses and what bodies are dealing with, I had to be more aggressive with the type of clients that I would have showing up regularly, and they didn't have time to go through the whole homeopathic progression. And I needed to get in there and just open up the drainage channels, replenish some microorganisms, take care of the deficiencies, and do a number of other things that we haven't gotten to yet. And homeopathy has its place. And when I use homeopathy, I prefer to use biopuncture, which means along with my acupuncture assessment, I would then take key points and then have injectable homeopathics that were suited, and I had a way to test for it, that I would inject right into those acupuncture points rather than just dry needling. And it had a marvelous effect along with everything else.
Yeah. And obviously we look here at these phases, we're getting into the cellular phases, degeneration, differentiation. That's, or I assume the big C word starts to come into play.
Yeah. Quick comment about the C word. And I'm just going to talk about this quickly on one level of reality because there's a lot of levels of reality. In fact, we're going to see the original level of reality here in a couple slides. So let's just say that your body has been depositing a bunch of junk into a particular area. It's kind of walled it off to keep it there, try to contain it. But then over a prolonged period of time, you're going to have cellular changes. You're going to have a whole process of anaerobic activity. That means an area, a little focus in the body that is devoid of oxygen. And therefore, it is going to start undergoing fermentation. That fermentation is going to breed the life cycles of organisms that probably aren't going to be the best for your long-term health. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a growth possibly in that area because when the body proliferates cells that we would then call a growth, whether benign or what people consider metastatic, which is another whole discussion and mythology as far as why things will actually seem to appear in another area of the body remote from the original site. That's not because certain cells migrated through the lymph and then infected some other part of the body, which incorporates that same mindset of infectious agents. There's something else going on there. But for right now, we don't have time to get into all that. That would be a discussion in our private site because that will definitely draw the wrath of the robots. So we'll do that at another time. But that proliferation of cells means that every cell is going to be bringing in oxygen because every cell is like a set of lungs. So now that growth is bringing in oxygen in an attempt to oxygenate and reverse the fermentation cycle that will then open up other mechanisms that physiologically will have a chance of cleaning out that debris that caused all that in the first place, which is why, in my experience, I am not just myself, I know a lot of other practitioners back in the day, why we'd see these growths disappear quite often. And not suggesting anything other than that's the way the body works. And the C word is probably the biggest fear of our time before they tried to invent a boogeyman to make us more afraid of something else yet again. And, the C thing is not a death sentence. And if somebody knows what's going on and has all the experience and technologies, those things can be turned around. And
I think
predictably
it's
are.
a fantastic example of how powerful knowledge is in terms of your ability to navigate your health and live a long life.
Yeah. And as we say often, what happens when you go get the diagnosis and this person maybe got the diagnosis because they just went in for an annual, workup. And then they say, oh, sorry, we have to tell you this. And the person was fine, no symptoms. And then 2 weeks later, they're dead. You know how many times I've seen that? That's the power of suggestion. Because as you and I know, Michael, that suggestion, if taken to heart, especially if it musters up or is accompanied by an intense emotion, then it is going to manifest your worst fears, even though it wasn't problematic before you really started making it happen.
The mammogram is the female confessional of our day.
Oh, and then your annual checkups, people that get those yearly, like they're suggested, within 10 years, it's probably sooner these days because it's also just piling on all the other things that are accumulating in bodies these days. But just 10 years of those, one every single year, is going to increase the necessity for the body to grow something in the breast at a 40% higher rate.
Yeah, there's actually quite phenomenal scientific papers out about this that have demonstrated this. So there's no need for me to go and have a small camera shoved up my rectum.
Yeah, how about that? Don't get me started. I get a little bit triggered with some of this stuff because I saw over the years so many people suffer needlessly, and had people that were otherwise starting to turn things around, but had one visit, with a white coat where they were convinced, or the white coats have a great way of just capitalizing on past programming. and intensifying it so that you do the wrong thing. Yeah, people that were turning around things and then convinced that, oh no, you should be doing this to make sure that you cover your bases with real medicine, and then just see people not just succumb, but also do so in a very ghoulish fashion.
Indeed. Yeah, I'm proud to say I haven't been to an MD for a annual quote unquote checkup since 2005. I haven't been to a dentist since 2000, I think 2 or 3. So, and I'm as healthy as can be, guys. So, yeah, this is what Alfa Vedic's all about, is taking charge of your health and through knowledge and being empowered to know who you are better. And hopefully we're providing you some not only information but some killer products too, that you can access. Okay, next slide,
And
sir. Oh, go
like
ahead.
everything, you need to do the great work, which means we can get information that sounds intriguing, might even ring true on some level. But until you put information to practical use and get the opportunity to sit back and observe results, then it's always just going to be mental, intellectual. But when you have that kind of feedback through experience, then that becomes knowledge. And that knowledge is what dispels all the fears that have been purposely cultivated within our consciousness for centuries.
Yeah. Then, I mean, and there is elements of truth to the concept of the profane and those who refuse to seek knowledge. In a way, you kind of have it coming that as Elliot said in the chat here, this humiliation ritual of going in and having something shoved up your rectum by a white coat. There is a whole element of sort of a culted ritual there in many ways that is quite breathtaking when you really step back and look at humanity and where we are now and the things people do under sort of the auspices of you need to do that because, well, that's what's common in society and that's what you're supposed to do thanks to noted quote unquote professionals or the experts, what they tell you to do.
And just like when you're being processed to be put in a jail cell, it's the same thing when you go in for your examination medically. The first thing in both situations is you have to take your clothes off and just kind of bury yourself and make yourself vulnerable. Okay, next slide.
Gotta love that gown too.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're getting into another realm, which is a little bit more upstream from the first three areas that can be compromised and cause what we explain as disease. This we're going to call the line of resistance. And as we've mentioned, the body is electric. And if you take laboratory assessments that allow you to extrapolate from biochemistry electricity, then you can really cut to the chase and go into those electrical vectors, tweak them in very minimalistic ways, and see huge changes. And the inverse, of course, is when you don't understand this level of how the body really operates and what the body really is, which is a composite of electrical vectors or waveforms, then you're really not going to understand how to go into some of the deeper issues that we're going to explain in another minute. And also, if that line of resistance is not optimal, what's going to happen is even a lot of the drainage remedies and things that we've already talked about, they're going to have more of a minimal effect on us as opposed to when the line of resistance is proper. So let's just read this here. Agronomist, biochemist, and mathematician Dr. Carrie A. Reams developed a working explanation about the fundamental ionic energy composition and function of biological life. Now, I've been involved with this laboratory assessment technique for good, I don't know, almost 40 years. And all I can say is without it, I would be really operating with a blindfold. So it's a very important part of my assessment. And the line of resistance, one, the validity of any laboratory assay is determined by its capacity to discern the role of each biochemical element within a functional composite. Biological ionization analysis employs a mathematical equation to quantify values of key elements within a proportionate whole and the degree of deviation from ideal ratios necessary for optimal physiology. So let's decipher that a little bit. Let's take an electrical system in your house. It has some very basic components that any electrician is going to understand. And based on what each of those components do, the electrician understands they have to work in unison with each other. Otherwise, you're going to burn out the system. You're going to short things out. So conductivity, which is a measure of the amount of energy or the initial impetus for energy, we might call voltage, or the amperage, which is the flow of electricity. And we talk about resistance, which is the speed or the velocity of electricity. Well, in this particular laboratory technique, we can take certain elements and correlate those to that exact every component of any common electrical system, because that's the way the body works. So, for instance, if the electricity, if I find out through this testing, is moving too rapidly, that is going to create a premature aging and inflammatory symptoms within the body and within tissues. That is something we would call alkaline. And, you know, we always say, well, it's good to be alkaline. Well, no, it's about balance. And if we're overly alkaline, then our resistance is too fast and we have issues. If, on the other hand, the pH indicates that the movement of the current in our body is too slow, then we're going to have stagnation and a whole different opposite set of symptoms. Chinese medicine understands this dipole very well and divides it into those two polarities to understand symptoms. They have different names for them, but they're talking about the same thing. Biological ionization analysis successfully decodes the quality of electric current within the biological matrix from biochemical conduits. And that's what we think of molecules, which are just waveforms that have the appearance of molecules, which supposedly, group together and create tissues. Well, actually, those are electrical elements, and the molecules are conduits for electrical currency or energy flow. And it reveals the intricate cause and effect of physiological dysfunction when you look at a simple equation that I'm going to get to in a second. At one glance, you can see how far a body is deviating from ideal and what kind of symptoms that is going to create. And in fact, one of the things that I can see very quickly when I look at this equation is 4 quadrants of the body. And the 4 quadrants, one is going to be more affected than the others, depending on how this energy flow is skewed. And depending on that quadrant that is more affected, that is going to immediately tell me of where a person's symptoms are already occurring or likely to appear in the future. If I do other assessments, for instance, in radiesthesia with a Lecker antenna, which is developed by an Austrian physicist to measure the symmetry of toroidal fields, which is what a body is, it's going to alert me to the same divisions in those four quadrants and tell me where the distortions in the toroidal or electrical field are and tell me where the symptoms are and why. And that opens up another whole level of intervention in order to work on that energetic body, toroidal field, etheric levels, subplanes, planes, and so forth. It gets involved and it gets a little bit surgical, but that is what is possible. And let's go to the next one. There are 6 basic tests, which is has to do with measuring total carbohydrates, pH, conductivity, cell debris, nitrate, nitrogens, and ammonia, nitrogen from urine and saliva. Now, the cell debris is very important because when a body is just normal and healthy, it is going to be passing off cells that have done their job, and in their place will be the perfect amount of new cells taking their place in the regenerative cycle. Now, if those cell debris are of a higher level that I can discern through this testing, I know there's abnormal breakdown of tissues and sloughing off of old cells, and those cells are going to be releasing genetic material into the bloodstream, and then that is going to be picked up on many levels of biofeedback, including telling the body maybe to start manufacturing exosomes, endosomes, a lot of these things that we confuse possibly with MTs. And that is the body's way of those exosomes are going to release, and endosomes from the exosomes are going to be releasing certain factors that might stimulate stem cell production in order to regenerate new tissues. It's going to stimulate the manufacture of certain surfactants that will help clean up the fluids and tissues of the bodies, and so forth. Now, the last thing we'll read here is the line of resistance reveals net energy gain or loss in real time by its ability to decipher the quality of currency flow through biochemistry. Ideal numbers represent a net energy gain, while energy loss accelerates the inevitability of aging and disease. And just like in the martial arts, you're taught how to not only conserve, but to build energy for greater effect in the arts, but also in your health, and building up the external Wei Qi that is going to make us less vulnerable to everything. That's what this is all about here. So the line of resistance, the last thing we'll say here is, if you just visualize that, when I take my measurements, those 6 measurements, I'm going to plug them into this equation, and it's going to tell me the amount of deviation, where the problems are, and very simple measures I can take in order to nudge that line of resistance more towards ideal over time, which is going to then allow all those other elements that we already talked about to work better when you take care of biome imbalances, deficiencies of elements, and so forth, and also to eliminate toxins, as we saw in the 6 stages of disease. So this is a 4th category that every physician should be very well versed in, because there's certain factors that I don't know how else you'd be able to get this kind of information, or to be able to observe the body exactly the way it works as far as a composite of electrical waveforms.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, this ties into Walter Russell, everything we talk about. I mean, this is the fundamentals of reality right here on the physical plane. We live in an electric universe. This is how literally information, right, flows through our body from the higher planes into the physical matrix. This is phenomenal.
And it also explains how, because the body works as an electrical unit, then it explains more how this interacts on those other levels of our biological etheric mechanism, which is mental, astral, etheric, and physical, and how informational fields are relayed from directly from consciousness, because we're talking about the transference of information, no different than a computer downloading information so that you can perform sort of some function to your software. The body works on identical processes. And the only reason why computers and our technology can do those sorts of things is because they're mimicking the original design already in play, albeit in a very crude technological fashion. And this transference of information then will delineate exactly how emotional plane, mental plane issues become physical. And it would explain to people practicing New German medicine how an insult to the psyche then triggers a brain center activation, which in turn triggers a biological expression in some organ or tissue of the body that is then mistaken as a disease or affliction, when in fact it is biology holographically mimicking those informational fields on other levels, and through that biological expression relieve stress and pressure at the level of the psyche, so that there's less impedance for the soul to do its job, which is to gain awareness and ultimately experience the ascension process.
Yeah. Phenomenal. This is once again a whole other show here. Should we move to the next slide and keep
Sure.
moving? Yeah.
How many hours have we been here?
Oh, we're coming up on 2, but I think we're
Okay.
on the last 2 here. So
yeah, we're good. Okay, miasm. We all think of, we all kind of understand the concept of karma, whether it's early in a lifetime or some other embodiment, depending on your belief system. We're just here to learn the game. And we're here to understand that we're powerful spiritual beings that have access to the universal creative capacity. We're individualizations of the creator, and we are given the free will to put energy in motion. And that energy in motion is going to create wonderful things, or it's going to create distortions. And unfortunately, those distortions never go away until we get clued in that they're there, and also that we have everything to say about clearing them up. So again, you don't have to do your karma forever. You just have to have the light bulb come on and then understand some very simple techniques that would allow you to put these energetic imbalances back into their proper proportions or balance. And then our problems go away. And we're also alleviating, another 100 go-arounds on the karmic wheel. Now, with that being said, miasms are collective karma. So if you look at historically different civilizations, you could take ours for an example. Okay, right now we happen to be experiencing a certain group of people that are trying to curtail our freedoms, amongst other things. Now, let's just say that happens throughout a civilization for a prolonged amount of time. Now, what's going to happen in that case is that people are going to create a perception that they have no say about their own experience and that other people have the right to encroach into our experience. Now, let's just say we go back to a certain segment of our history that might be correlated with some people understand as Atlantis. That was a vast continent and then went through many cycles of change over eons. But that phenomena of a small minority imposing their will on the rest of the population and the rest of the population taking it rather than saying F off, then that creates an energetic predisposition that Hahnemann, famous father of homeopathy, as he's known, to understand that that miasm becomes generational and becomes active in a lot of people to create afflictions that are a result of just bending down and taking it in the shorts. So we might correlate that with the C word miasm, which means otherwise insignificant and common and necessary cellular events become problematic and chronic and start, the tail wagging the dog sort of thing, and take on a life of their own and encroach in other areas of the body where that kind of cellular replication isn't necessary.
Well,
So
and I noticed,
Go
Bear,
ahead.
with the C word we're talking, which is, as you were saying, sort of the big scare of our time, suppression and conformity. I mean, that is the modern era, right? The modern age is all about being conformist. What is the greatest fear people have is being called out, being canceled. It makes a lot of sense that our collective destiny right now is based around the C word when you're just looking at essentially going against your own sense of what is right for you.
And that has become the more feared affliction of our time. Everybody is just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Oh my God, I just read that 1 out of every 2 people. And well, as a matter of fact, it's more than 1 out of every 2 people. It's 100% of us. But those processes in a normal body are fulfilling a function. They come and go without us ever worrying about it. And then that means you don't have to grow a basketball on the side of your head or something that, knows no boundaries. And let's just take a couple others here very quick. The Sora miasm has to do with our original survival instincts as a species. So if you go in different times, including now, people are fearing for their survival. And do you ever hear of anybody having skin afflictions and things? Well, that's because the skin being that main boundary that demarcates our being from everything around us, when we have those scarcity issues or wondering if we're going to survive war, acute diseases, accidents, weather, those create that, again, penetration of that boundary level in a little bit of a different way than we're just talking about with the C word, but it is going to bring with it a lot of skin afflictions, including, well, let's just go to the next one, psychosis. This has to do with overproduction. So the other one, it's, kind of a fear of survival, which creates a certain area of maladies and also carries with it certain energetic predispositions. And I even paired them with the elements, like the first one was the Sora, the earth element. We won't go through all these, there's not enough time. But the psychosis, that one has to do where there's an overproliferation of tissues or fluids, discharges in the body, sexual diseases. So when we have this miasm, which is like a karmic, energetic, informational field, now you get together with that person you just hooked up with, and the next morning you wake up with the dreaded thing. It requires that you have this energetic, miasmic predisposition, and also that your partner is operating on the same level of energetic contagion. You amplify that. That changes physiology that necessitates certain organisms to migrate to the scene. You run to the doctor like, oh my God, what's this coming out of my body orifice? They culture it. They say, oh, you got the clap. Well, no. And it wasn't caused because somebody gave you a germ when you were having relationships. We go to the syphilitic, which is kind of the opposite polarity of the cytosis. Rather than over proliferation, it's that part of the energetic cycle that is about death, destruction, breakdown, contraction. When this is at play, people start having panic attacks. It's more energetically aligned with the fire element, which is just kind of destruction and breakdown and purification. And in Chinese medicine, we call this the Shen and the Ko cycle. It's the opposite polarities of too much or not enough, or too much breakdown, too much proliferation. So these can be explained in a lot of different ways, but the energetics of all of these, including the next one, tuberculosis, which is a very prominent one in our modern era because it has to do with miasmic energetic that has to do with displacement. When we are, as a species, moved around because of wars, like my ancestors came to America to escape fascism in Italy and Peru. So they were displaced, they were fleeing. So you could see in just a situation like that, how many of these miasms could be activated in an individual and be responsible for making one vulnerable for all the physiological and physical ramifications. And I think we'll just let people kind of go through this, and it would make a lot of sense if you really understand each of these and how they set the stage, or the energetic patterns that never go away until we as a species and also individually outgrow this mythology and understand our role as spiritual co-creators that are not victims of anything.
Right. And also, of course, be applied to the concept of pandemic, right? And
yeah,
sort of these large scale epidemics.
And if you don't think that the ghoul class understands all this and has weaponized all of these things, then you got another thing coming. And yes, there is a conspiracy. Okay, so last one.
Yes, sir.
We've talked about this before. Emotion is just good old-fashioned energy that we would consider your elevated, feel good, no limitation, no fear, where and when you're in that level of resonance relative to your feelings or your emotions, energy is not going to be impeded. It's not going to be congested or stymied in any way. It's just going to flow. And then when we look at that line of resistance, it means that test as well is going to show that the electricity is flowing with less deviation from ideal. You're going to be less prone to any affliction. Old afflictions are going to be straightening themselves out when we stop harboring these emotions, which are the lower toxic emotions based on fear, scarcity, and all the rest of the stuff that the ghoul class is desperately trying to keep us within. And I'm not going to get into this, but the first thing I have is the Enneagram. And the reason why I even put this down yesterday, let me read it. Character fixations explain behavioral inclinations in play throughout a given embodiment as understood through the Sufi model of universal creation. Gurdjieff brought the Enneagram back. And the Enneagram really can be better understood at a level of physics through the explanation within vortex mathematics and also Russellian science. So let's just take that example of how individually and collectively we put things in motion in past times, which create distortions in our energy field. Well, that is in fact going to create distortions in the symmetrical waveforms that would otherwise produce health, abundance, and all the good things we desire. And those distortions then are going to become within that level of waveform mechanics, a rub, just like a wagon wheel that is a little bit askew. So every time it comes around the bend, it's going to hit the fender at the same exact time and create friction. And through the Enneagram, we understand at the deepest level that this has everything to do with all of the karmic patterning that we put in play. And depending on that, if you have studied the Enneagram, you can discern what level along a 9-point star, which just represents 9 different dimensions on a waveform. And depending where they are, it's going to give us an inclination. So when we have a life experience, we're going to have a reaction that's going to be maybe a fear reaction or an anger reaction and so forth. So when you understand this, it helps you understand what makes you tick, and that the fact that you're just playing old tapes. And then more advanced Enneagram work is going to tell you a lot more information, but that's just kind of the tip of it. And then, so you could think of the Enneagram and that level as something that we come in with, baggage that it's our job in this embodiment to clean up. Stress patterning is more, now it's going to, stress patterning are more acquired reactions that we develop just through any given lifetime. But of course, they're going to be amplified and put in play with what we already understood is what you come in with. But the stress patterning can be amplified and become more chronic depending on how much we don't understand and keep repeating the same mistakes. So a personal stress pattern is our filters of how we see things. And when you have filters rather than seeing things the way they really are, then we have the tendency to suppress just our ability to live life and experience unencumbered and in an unlimited fashion. Early programming, that we all have in our family and our schools, where ignorance becomes generational. These belief systems from that programming compound these conflicts, and then we have what we call conflict energy. That is when you have a conflict, a little drama with a petty tyrant in our life or something like that. It builds up emotional pressure. And so then that necessitates certain traumatic events in our life that might be very unpleasant when they're happening, but they are very productive in that they release pressure. So you might be going through some horrendous divorce or an illness or something, and it's nasty when you're going through it. But mysteriously, on the other end of it, we kind of have a relief of a sense of burden. And, it's sort of like going out in the morning after an extended storm and we have nice bright skies and the atmosphere is clear and the air smells good. That's the same thing as, experience after one of these traumas. But you really don't want to have to keep experiencing traumas in your life or dramas in order to clear the air. It's better to understand it. Hey, I can take care of this before I have to have, a serious illness or, a divorce or a breakdown in my business and so forth. So the last thing it says here, traumas release conflict energy or emotional back pressure. They occur at regular intervals, and traumas create a toxic radiation that then, depending on the level of the emotional content or the characteristics of it, it is going to create energy and organ depletion. And depending on the organ involved, it's going to dictate which organs succumb first and which diagnosis you're going to receive. Now, the lymphatics are very delicate tissues, and the lymphatics usually succumb first. And we know this because there were studies where people were given actual physical radiation, and then they were able to scale every tissue of the body and determine which ones succumb to radiation first and which tissues are more resilient. Now, some of the testing that I used to do, which was an extension of the line of resistance laboratory assessments from the electrical vectors, I can do some more mathematical computations and determine trauma chains when they occurred in a body, which is very astounding to patients when they are confronted with that, because it would tell them when certain things in their life happen, why things are occurring now, and it would also tell me exactly what organ was really taking most of the heat because of the situation. And so I would have to do very extensive work with the kind of patients I saw in order to release this conflict energy so that then their bodily afflictions didn't have to persist in order to be a relief valve for pressure on that level of the psyche. And of course, we already mentioned German New Medicine. That was an understanding put out by Dr. Hammer and validated in brilliant ways that the body does in fact use biology in order to relieve pressure. The only thing I would add to German New Medicine, and it's my bias based on my experience, is that that alone, without assessing at a very deep level all these levels of the bioterrain that we've discussed today, you wouldn't have a predictably favorable outcome if, for instance, the body was going through a biphasic expression through biology that then we would call disease. It would have a tendency to get stuck in one of those phases because it might have a deficiency of the inorganic organic elements. There might be a deficiency in the the indigenous microorganism populations that are necessary to be at the site of, say, a proliferation of tissues in the event that the body had to grow something as far as biological expression. But then when it's done, certain microorganisms have to be pleomorphically altered into the mutational stage to be right there at the scene. So when that growth was no longer necessary, then those organisms in their scavenger mode of activity are going to break apart and digest that growth so that that growth did not continue unabated and actually get to the point where it starts eating all your nutrition, in which case you get to that end stage that people recognize as emaciation and say, oh, another C word victim, when in fact, no, you had a growth that basically starved you to death. Nobody has ever died from the C word. And if you understand what the body's trying to do on all the levels we've talked about today, then you have a very good chance of coming around the bend. And the most important thing is not only did you alleviate a condition, but you no longer have to live in fear of what used to make you afraid. And then every time you read some medical genius talking about how we're all going to get the C word, you can laugh in his face.
Boom. Amazing. It's so cool to see how these all interconnect too. There's a lot of
Yes.
cross-pollination, and really the holistic side of all this is really fascinating from.
Yeah. So I think you can take that down and we can just close up there. Any final comments you have or questions? Any questions from the peanut gallery?
What I've been stressing to people is to join the new platform so we can continue the conversation in the private. And I think, you know, obviously it's very apparent that knowledge is key, and you know, handling your deficiencies, your physical, your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, your psychic, your cultural, your community. Those deficiencies are everywhere, and that is part of doing the great work, right? Is of service to yourself and to others, leads to fantastic health and a vibrant, long life.
Yeah. And that's why the alchemists of old called it the great work, because they would, of course, be very studious about learning what other people had, discovered that went before them. But at the same time, they would go to the laboratory and mimic these principles that we're talking about today in a laboratory setting and observe that not only is this the way of natural design, but they, as co-creators, could mimic natural design, expedite natural design, and in the process resonate with natural design that accelerated their own spiritual awakening.
And hence why we're here. Amazing, Bear. We were just kind of laughing in the chat about, oh yeah, you just threw this together last night. I mean, obviously this has been your life's work, so it's very ingrained in your intelligence and knowing, inner knowing, but it's just phenomenal that you're able to put this together. And it is a very in-depth, very all-encompassing presentation, and I will make sure to upload it to our site, and that link will be in the show notes below. It'll also be on, I'll put a post on alfavedic.com for folks to go to download and view the presentation itself. And then once again, we will further distill this and extrapolate from this and expand upon this in future Alfacasts, as well as on the community site, which is full of really cool groups, right, Bear, that sort of individuate these concepts, right, into themselves.
Yeah, and there's so much, so many informed and brilliant people on the back end there that I don't just look at that as something that I'm going to be answering questions. I go there and get a lot of good information myself because, I live in my own little bubble and there's good stuff happening all the time. You tell me about a lot of things I haven't heard about because they don't let me off the farm very much. So I rely on you and, our new website to just kind of keep me in the loop. And then I share what I've picked up over the years. And just in summary today, my hopes is that the next person that asks me, well, if MTs don't cause disease, or if we have these diseases that medics claim have unknown etiologies, which is another way of saying we don't know what the F is going on here, but we're going to call it something anyway and then give you things that'll probably make you worse, but it's just to justify that we know what we're doing in the first place. So all of the 6 areas that we've talked about will explain, and I don't care what you come up with, it will explain how every malady known to man happens without a belief system in invisible invaders or just diseases that somehow exist out in nature and are lurking in every alley and doorway waiting to pounce on us.
Brilliant. Yep, from chicken pox to the common cold, it's all covered here. And I'll just say one more thing. I wanted to just do a quick share just to give one more look, guys, into the platform, just because for me, 2024 is the time of big change. It's the time that we all come together and really bring it. Can you see that, Bear? I just wanted to show people how awesome the platform is. Bear is active in here, guys. He's kind of left Telegram because it's just such a, excuse my French, shit show in there. And this we can really, pinpoint specific topics and dive into it. That's important from, I mean, look at from gardening to spagyrics to I've been covering thinking and destiny stuff I'm into, decentralized technology. We've literally got a section for asking Dr. Bear. So if you have specific questions, that's for co-op members only. You can come in for just $5 to access most of this. If you want to spend more and become a co-op member, then you can actually get into the more, intimate groups. And in the executive co-op membership level, we actually have monthly Zoom calls, and that is like the next level. So I just wanted to show you guys this. We put a ton of work into this. We're going to be adding more courses too. Here we've got the I Am the Living Law course right now, but we have a mycelium inoculation course that we'll be putting up here that is very practical for your food forest. I'm going to be adding the end of COVID into this, as well as a ton of other future workshops we'll be doing. And then, of course, on the AV media tip, we've got a ton of like kind of forgotten and lost interviews that I've found from Bear on here, like ones from myself on like the Way Forward Summit. And we put the entire event summit on here. If you guys remember from 2021, that was just phenomenal. Like here's a head flux set from Music and Sky that can be found nowhere besides the Music and Sky site or with us. So it really is unique. It's definitely, if you're into Alfa Vedic, there's no reason for you to not join. For $5 a month, you can get access to all this stuff. So that's my commercial. We don't do a lot of commercials on here, but I felt it was important to do that, Bear, just because for me, this is actually a great service to mankind and what this platform is. It's not just us, selling widgets on here. It's really not. It's about us being able to have a private place where we can come together and develop solutions and educate each other.
And we created a permaculture model where we could actually build out a living prototype for everything we talk about, and where I could do all the things that I've experienced in my lifetime. We have a farm that's specializing in medicinal herbs. We expand it all the time. We have a laboratory where we actually don't just read books about spagyrics, we're actually doing it. We're actually employing all the different sustainable farming techniques that we talk about, biodynamics and so forth, and making products and selling them is the way we keep the whole wheel going. And we've both been around Mike and I for a while, and I don't know of anybody else, and I'm not demeaning anybody else, but I don't know of anyone else that is putting all of the pieces together in one spot. A lot of people are talking about it, and that's good. That's what we're about, is to really try to stimulate those kinds of discussions, because the first step is to get information that we can put into use to become knowledge in the first place. So that's what we're all about. I'm comfortable in my life. I could sort of disappear, into the sunset. There's part of me that would like to do that. Maybe just go park a van in Cabo somewhere and watch the waves and surf and do yoga on the beach, but we're doing this. It's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love. And we believe that we were born in these times to make a difference. It's all coming to a head in 2024. So I think we're here just in the nick of time. And your support is allowing us to do what we do and hopefully reach more people to mitigate the collateral damage that is absolutely going to be accelerating this year.
Awesome, Bear. Well, thanks so much, man, for all that you've done for us and the community with your wisdom and being open to share it. Hey, once again, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Give Deb a hug from me, and of course, your sons and their families who are all good friends of mine as well. I wish I could be down there. And hey, Happy New Year, guys.
And Michael, my love to your whole clan. We've known each other for a long time. And yeah, I've done what I've done, but without your efforts, uh, nobody would have ever heard about this work in the first place. So you've gotten us out there, and sometimes I curse you for that, but not really. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it takes a team, and
Truly
we've
does.
got a good team there.
And speaking of the team, I just want to give a thanks to people that have moderated for us for years. Huge shout out and thanks for 2023 work done by Giselle, who's in the chat. We love you. You're just such an awesome force. And, you know, Mark went and
Giselle
he
is
just,
awesome, and
she,
she's done some favors for me behind the scenes, which I appreciate very much, and love her, and I really can't wait to give her a hug in person.
and Mark, I know you showed up late to the magic here, but you always bring so much humor and comedy to the chat. We appreciate you. All of our Telegram admins that have come in now are helping us moderate on the new platform, from Mandy to, of course, we mentioned Giselle and Hulda. Shout out to Hulda for all that you bring. You're always there in our executive co-op meetings. We love you, and your humor and everything that you bring in terms of your introspection and all that. Everybody in the Telegram, thank you. And then like the old school folks, like Susan has been here since like 2018. Of course, Robert, we love your humor. You've been around since then as well. It's really, I think, a testament to what we're about, Bear, when we've had people on the back, you know, sort of in the back scenes of what we're doing from that long ago that are still with us. So, and then of course, Shannon at the farm, always holding it down. Thank you so much. Jacob, who's come on board and helped us get this site launched. You are such a badass. Thank you for all that you bring and just your talents. And anyone I'm forgetting right now, please forgive me. But we are so appreciative of all that you guys do and help us with in behind the scenes. Okay, guys, thanks so much. We'll see you next week with Michael Wan coming back. It's been about a year and a half since he's been on the show. That'll be
Oh,
a great
fun!
one. And then,
It
yeah,
will be.
and we've got a great lineup coming up. I mean, we've got Steve Young coming back, Headflux, who I was just showing his set. He's got a new book coming out any day now. He's really stepping out onto his own. So we're going to be I think we may be the first to have him on and talk about this new book where he's really dispelling a lot of the fallacies in physics coming from his background. So that's phenomenal. And who else we got coming in January? We've got Isabel finally coming. We had to Isabel, a friend, or I believe Isabel Miga, the water nymph, if you will. She's just so masterful at educating people about the beautiful nature of the water element. And then final on January, Eileen McCusick is coming back. We had a couple practitioners, I
Oh,
believe, in the
great!
chat today. So Eileen, to talk about the natural musicality and harmonics of the world and how she engages with that on the daily. That's going to be a phenomenal chat. So we're
And
kicking off the
she's
year in a
always
great way.
coming up with expanding her technology. So I can't wait to talk to her.
Yeah, she is a dear friend. So thanks, guys. Hey, 2024, it's going to be an exciting year. Cannot wait to share it with you guys. We'll see you on the new platform. We love you so much. Remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go for a hike, go plant something, even in the winter. I've got my greenhouse going. I've got my low tunnels going. It's just so powerful to be working with Mother Nature as much as we can. And we'll see you next week. Love you. Thank you, guys.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year.